Thank you, Toastmaster of the Day, fellow Toastmasters, and honored guests. The author C. Joy Bell once wrote, "The only way we can live is if we grow. The only way we can grow is if we change. The only way we can change is if we learn." I've been a doctor for over 30 years. Damn, I'm old. In that time, I've treated thousands of patients. I've seen some miraculous cures and some heartbreaking failures. I've seen people at their best and at their worst. Throughout my career, I've learned many important life lessons that have made me a better doctor. But you don't have to be a doctor to benefit from the experiences I've had and the lessons I've learned. Today, I'd like to share with you 3 important life lessons from a doctor. Lesson number 1, always put the socks back on. One day, I was called to the emergency room to see a patient. The patient was a cute little old lady with a beautiful crown of silver gray bushy hair. She had passed out at home. Fortunately, she didn't break anything. I began to interview her, but she wasn't very talkative. I came to the conclusion that she was demented and that I was not going to get much information out of her. I proceeded to examine her from head to toe. So at the end of my exam, I took off her socks to check her feet for swelling. Seeing none, I turned to leave the room. Before I could get one step away, I hear this high-pitched, screechy voice behind me saying, "Doctor, where are you going?" I turn around to see my cute little old lady staring me in the eyes. "Well," I said, "I finished your exam. Now I'm going to see another patient." "But doctor," she continued, "you took my socks off, but you didn't put them back on." I was stunned by what she was saying because I really didn't think she had a clue about what was going on. She then says, "You men, you always take things off and you never put anything back on." That isn't true, is it, ladies? Well, what other lessons did I learn from this encounter? First of all, I learned that you should always finish what you start. Always finish the job. Don't be sloppy and don't try to cut corners. The other thing I learned is that you should never assume that someone doesn't see or understand what you're doing with them. When you assume, you make an ass of you and me. Don't be an ass, like I was. Always put the socks back on. Lesson number 2. Speaking of assumptions, you should never assume that the information you were given or the results of a test are always correct. On a day, about 20 years ago, I had my first personal experience with a serious illness. Up until that day, I had never been sick a day in my life. I was walking through the hospital when suddenly I began to feel extremely tired. I just assumed that I hadn't gotten enough sleep the night before. As the week dragged on, I felt progressively fatigued. And then I started feeling this sharp pain in my chest. The pain got worse whenever I took a deep breath. I went to my doctor, who examined me. Didn't find anything wrong. He thought I probably just had the flu, but just to make sure, he sent me for a chest x-ray. I went for the x-ray, and then called my doctor later for the results. He tells me that the report of the x-ray says that my chest is completely normal. I was feeling so bad that I found it hard to believe that my x-ray could be normal. To confirm my suspicions, I went down to the radiology department to look at the x-ray myself. When I looked at the film, I was shocked at what I saw. My lungs looked fine, but my heart had this strange, unusual shape to it. I rushed down to the heart lab to get an ultrasound scan of my heart. I did it myself. Whoa. The scan showed that my heart was surrounded by fluid, enough fluid to fill a large bottle of Coca-Cola. I had made my own diagnosis. I had pericarditis, a viral infection of the sac that surrounds the heart. I had caught it from a patient I had seen a few weeks before. Fortunately, I didn't need a drainage procedure, and I gradually improved over the next few weeks. What I learned from this experience is that we cannot always accept what we see, hear, or read as being true without question. We need to use our own good judgment to analyze the information we are given before we accept it as fact. I also learned that we're all only human and that any of us can get sick at any time when we least expect it. Make sure you have good health insurance. Lesson number 3. Are you ready for this? Lesson number 3 is that stuff happens. Things happen that cannot be easily explained. What are the 2 words that every doctor dreads hearing over the hospital loudspeaker system? Code blue. Code blue. Code blue emergency room. Code blue emergency room. I was a young resident doctor on call for the hospital emergency response team. I rushed down to the emergency room to find an elderly man who was in full-blown code blue cardiac arrest. Quick, insert the intravenous tube. You, start chest compressions. You, insert the breathing tube into his lungs. Everyone was doing their part to save this man's life. We brought in the defibrillator machine, shock his heart back into rhythm. Everyone, clear the bed. Shocking, 200 joules. Shocking, 300 joules. Nothing was working. We continued our resuscitation attempts for over an hour. The EKG remained flatlined. He had no pulse. He wasn't breathing on his own. We finally came to the conclusion that our efforts were futile. Let's call him. We all agreed. Time of death, 3:55 p.m. We left the room to speak to the family and to let the nurses prepare the body for transfer to the morgue. We were just about to speak to the family when suddenly one of the nurses in the room started screaming. He's still breathing. We rushed back into the room, and to our astonishment, he was breathing. I felt his wrist. He had a pulse. We hooked up the EKG machine. He had a heart rhythm where he had been flatlined for the last hour. We resumed our resuscitation efforts. We were able to stabilize him and transfer him to the intensive care unit. Over the next few weeks, he gradually improved, woke up, and eventually left the hospital. To this day, I cannot come up with a medical or scientific explanation as to how this man came back to life from what was certain death. His dramatic, improbable recovery was a true miracle. How many times have we heard of things happening that could not be easily explained?
Many.
How many times have we heard of people surviving against impossible odds?
Many.
The explanation?
Stuff happens.
Stuff happens.
Stuff, things happen.
Miracles do happen.
Yes.
In conclusion, I've talked about 3 important life lessons from my career that we can all benefit from. Number 1, always put the socks back on. Always finish what you start to the best of your ability. And don't be a, you know what, ass. That's right, I said it. Number 2, never assume that the information you were given is always correct. Use your own good judgment to analyze the information you were given before you accept it as fact. And please make sure you have health insurance. We're all only human, you know. And finally, believe it or not, stuff happens. Miracles do happen. The author, Mary Oliver, gave us some good advice as to what to do when we encounter important life lessons. Pay attention. Be astonished. And tell about it. Thank you, Toastmasters.